Cardinal Robert Sarah is one of the most influential and, at the same time, the most controversial figures of the Catholic Church in the present times. Born in Guinea, West Africa, he closely lived the challenges of being a Christian on a continent, marked by religious conflicts, authoritarian regimes, and a strong Muslim presence. Named Cardinal by John Paul II, and later chosen by Benedict XV and Pope Francis to occupy prominent positions in the Vatican, Sarah has consolidated himself as a firm voice which does not fear what he thinks, even if it puts him on a collision route with the dominant thought. His conservative profile made him a symbol of resistance to secularization within the Church, and his positions on sensitive themes such as Islam, immigration, and religious identity have generated strong reactions. In his books and interviews, he presents himself as a man of deep faith who sees the moral and spiritual decay of the West as one of the greatest dangers of our time. But after all, what does he say about Muslims? Beloved brother, beloved sister, before continuing, pause this video. I'm inviting you to take a step of faith now. Comment Amen in the comments, because I know God hears the cry of each of us, and He has a special blessing ready for His family. Do not let this opportunity pass. Enjoy this video and subscribe to the channel, and still share this video with 2 people so that this blessing is folded and the life of those life that you love. Imagine the power of this blessing coming to your home, bringing peace, protection, and prosperity. God wants to bless you, but we need to open our hearts in faith and unity. Let's go together like a great family, spread the love and light of Christ. May the Lord cover you with your grace and lead you in every step. Don't wait any longer, do it now. Cardinal Sarah's speeches over Muslims draw attention because they play directly on topics considered taboos in the modern public debate. In an era marked by politically correct and seeking to avoid cultural confrontations, Sarah adopts a sometimes lasting frontal posture when dealing with the advance of Islam in the West, and that does not go unnoticed. It is not limited to theological observations. It goes beyond, going into issues such as immigration, cultural security, and the loss of Christian roots in Europe. His statements are seen by some as a courageous warning, and for others as an inflamed speech. What most shocks is that these words come not from a politician or activist, but of a prince of the Church, who speaks in the name of spiritual and moral principles. When a cardinal says that the West is dying because he has lost his soul, he is not just making a social criticism, but pointing to a deeper spiritual battle. And in this, the role of Islam enters tightly. Robert Sarah's view of Islam was not born of ideological theories or discourses. It was shaped by its direct experience. Created in Guinea, a Muslim-majority African country, Sarah had contact with Islam early on, living with Muslim families, Islamic religious leaders, and at the same time being a fervent Catholic amid political and religious tensions. This experience has given him a more concrete look at how Islam manifests himself in different contexts, both in peaceful coexistence and times of tension. In various interviews and writings, he reports that many Muslims are godly people with strong values who respect their traditions, something he admires. However, the Cardinal also warns of the risk of political Islam and the instrumentalization of religion as a tool for power. That is, his criticism is not simplistic or xenophobic, but based on direct observation and pastoral concern with the Christian faith in the face of forces he considers threatening to Western identity. When Cardinal Sarah says he is speaking the truth about Muslims, he is assuming a moral and spiritual position. For him, the truth is not just an objective fact, but a spiritual reality that needs to be proclaimed, even if it generates discomfort. In the religious context, especially in the Catholic tradition, to say truth implies fidelity to the gospel, courage to defend the values of faith and disposition to warn against error, even when it is unpopular. In the case of Islam, Sarah warns of the risk of relativizing differences between religions as if they all led to the same place. He believes that this vision is dangerous because it dilutes the truth of Christianity and weakens the identity of the faithful. For Sarah, telling the truth is to recognize that Islam has aspects incompatible with the Christian vision of God, salvation, and human freedom. This does not mean hatred or rejection of Muslim people, but a clear stance on what he sees as a concrete spiritual threat. Among Cardinal Sarah's most impactful statements about Islam, the statement that Islam is not afraid to affirm its faith, while Western Christianity is kneeling before secularism. This speech, published in interviews and reinforced in his books, exposes his view that Islam is now more vigorous and coherent than modern Christianity, which would be surrendering to the culture of relativism. On another occasion, he stated that Europe has forgotten his Christian roots and is therefore vulnerable to Islam. These statements generated controversy, as they were seen by some as alarmists and even Islamophobic. However, the Cardinal insists that his intention is not to attack Muslims, but to alert Christians about their own spiritual weakness. He criticizes the loss of faith and the abandonment of tradition as the true causes of the European crisis, and uses Islam as a mirror that reveals this decay. Its direct language bothers, but also causes reflection. For Cardinal Sarah, the relationship between Christianity and Islam is not just a dialogue between religions, but a true spiritual clash. He does not deny that there are common values, such as faith in a single God, or the appreciation of prayer and spiritual life. However, Sarah sees deep differences and, in many cases, unconcilious. In his writings, he states that Islam, in essence, does not separate religion from politics, which makes it more than a personal belief. It is a structure of power and law that seeks to shape the whole society. Christianity, according to him, is based on the freedom of conscience and the separation between faith and civil power. For the Cardinal, the West abandoned his Christian roots and therefore became fragile in the face of a religion like Islam, which grows precisely where there is spiritual emptiness. He argues that this clash will not be overcome with weapons or politics, but with a renewed Christian faith, strong and consistent with its values. One of the strongest marks of Sarah's thought is his forceful criticism of secularism and religious relativism. He believes that the biggest problem of the West is not the growth of Islam, but the internal collapse of Christianity, caused by the loss of faith and the rejection of God in public life. For the Cardinal, when a society begins to treat all religions as equivalent, it denies the objective truth of the Christian faith and weakens its spiritual identity itself. He sees with concern the way churches adapt to cultural fads, failing to proclaim uncomfortable truths to please the world. In this scenario, Islam appears as a non-yielding force, which maintains its principles firmly. Sarah doesn't blame the Muslims for this. On the contrary, he admires his conviction, but it warns that religious relativism in Christianity paves the way for other religions to occupy the space left by the weakening of faith. For him, only a church faithful to the gospel can resist this trend. Cardinal Sarah is a fierce critic of immigration policies that, according to him, favor the uncontrolled entry of Muslims in Europe without any requirement for cultural or religious integration. He does not condemn immigrants individually, but questions the ingenuity of governments who, in the name of tolerance, endanger the European Christian identity. In interviews and speeches, Sarah warned that many of these immigrants are not just looking for better living conditions, but also bring with them a deeply different worldview, often incompatible with Western values. For him, Europe is experiencing a kind of cultural suicide, passively accepting the loss of its traditions in the name of poorly understood diversity. However, Sarah does not promote the closure of borders for hatred or fear, but by a clear view that all hospitality needs to be accompanied by criteria. He argues that the Church welcomes, yes, but without forgetting who it is and what it represents. In the world, one of the strongest accusations made by Sarah is that the West lives today paralyzed by fear. Fear of offending, fear of being tried intolerant, fear of affirming his own Christian identity. He calls this attitude silent apostasy, where in the name of peace and coexistence, societies fail to affirm what they believe. Sarah denounces this fear as the true poison of our time. For him, political and even religious leaders are ashamed of the gospel and are silent in the face of ideologies that threaten faith. In this vacuum, Islam grows hard, for it offers clarity, purpose, and spiritual discipline, all that is missing in the decaying West. The Cardinal states that the problem is not in the Muslims, but in the moral weakness of Christians who gave up their mission. He calls for a brave church that does not fear be countercultural. Sarah says what many avoid saying, that silence and cowardice are as dangerous as any external threat. One of the greatest confusion about Sarah's lines is the interpretation that he is attacking Muslims as individuals. However, careful analysis shows that its main target is political Islam, that is, the use of religion as an instrument of social, cultural, and even military domination. The Cardinal clearly distinguishes between the simple, devout Muslims with whom he lived in Africa and the ideologues who use Islam for power purposes. He criticizes the West's tendency to ignore this difference and treat Islam as a legitimate form of religious expression, when in fact, for him, it is a threat to freedom. Sarah denounces the connivance of certain European governments with radical Islamic movements and accuses the media to silence about the dangers of extremism. Still, he always reinforces that his call is not for hatred, but for spiritual vigilance and faithfulness to the Christian faith. The question, therefore, is not the Muslims, but which Islam we are allowing to grow. Perfect. Here is part 3. With topics 11 to 15 developed, maintaining the same standard of quality and fluid style to facilitate high-retention YouTube video adaptation. 11. How did the media react to Cardinal Sarah's lines? Cardinal Sarah's statements about Islam and the West quickly caught the attention of international media, but the reception was not uniform. While Catholic and conservative vehicles presented him as a prophetic and courageous voice, able to say what many fear expressing, much of the mainstream Western media portrayed him as a controversial, even divisive figure. European newspapers and magazines highlighted the alarmist tone of their lines, suggesting that it could be feeding Islamophobia and further tensioning interreligious dialogue. However, Sarah has always been clear in saying that her criticism is not directed to people, but ideologies and thinking systems that threaten religious freedom and Christian identity. Still, his firm posture contrasts strongly with the dominant narrative of conciliation at any cost. For many journalists, the fact that a high member of the Catholic clergy openly criticizing migratory policies and the growth of political Islam was sufficient to put it under suspicion. This did not prevent his books from becoming bestsellers in several countries. The reactions to Sarah's thinking are intense, both among his critics and among his defenders. Critics accuse him of promoting a discourse that feeds polarization and hinders the dialogue between religions. For them, their words are dangerous because they reinforce negative stereotypes about Muslims and create a climate of confrontation rather than approach. Some progressive theologians claim that he should focus more on building bridges than raising walls. On the other hand, His advocates see him as one of the few voices within the Church that still have the courage to speak clearly and without fear of cultural censorship. Admirers compare him to figures such as Benedict XV, who also warned of the risks of relativism. For these groups, Sarah is not fostering hatred, but offering a necessary spiritual alert, and many avoid listening. The polarization around the Cardinal shows that his words touch sensitive points, causing both resistance and deep identification between those who care about the future of the Christian faith. Despite his blunt criticism, Sarah does not completely reject dialogue with Muslims. On the contrary, he believes that it is possible and even necessary and authentic, but not even on empty concessions. For the Cardinal, the true interreligious dialogue is only possible when each side knows who it is, what it believes, and what is willing to defend. He rejects a type of politically correct dialogue, which relativizes beliefs in the name of superficial peace. Sarah values the peaceful coexistence with Muslims and recognizes that there are many sincere, respectful, and willing Muslims. However, he warns that this cannot mean giving up Christian identity or ignoring the risks of radical Islam. For the dialogue to be true, it takes spiritual courage, mutual respect, and doctrinal clarity. Thus, Sarah proposes a path of living together firmly in faith, without naivete and without free hostility. A difficult balance, but possible for those who desire peace with integrity. At the center of Cardinal Sarah's message is an appeal in love with a return to the authentic, alive and fearless Christian faith. For him, the biggest problem of the West is not external, such as immigration or the growth of other religions, but internal, the loss of God's sense of sacred prayer and centrality in people's lives. He states that while Muslims hold fixed times of prayer and daily religious rituals, many Christians barely attend Sunday Mass. For Sarah, the spiritual crisis of the West is an invitation for Christians to reconnect with their own faith, rescue the liturgy, discipline, and fervor of the early centuries. He does not see Islam as an enemy to be fought, but as a challenge that reveals how much Christianity has lost its transforming force. Therefore, its proposal is clear. Either Christianity recovers its soul and identity, or will remain only a cultural memory in an increasingly shaped world by other beliefs. Cardinal Sarah's speech may be uncomfortable, but he invites us to a deep reflection on faith, identity, and spiritual courage. Regardless of whether or not we agree with each of your statements, your call to authenticity cannot be ignored. In a world where everything is negotiable, Sarah proposes a non-selling faith, which does not adapt to each fashion, and that remains firm in the face of cultural and religious pressures. In approaching Islam, he is not doing a religious war, but asking Christians to stop living on autopilot and rediscover the value of their tradition. Your warning is hard, but perhaps necessary. After all, what is at stake, according to him, is not only the coexistence between religions, but the spiritual future of the West. And here is the invitation to the viewer. Do you believe that Christianity still has the strength to influence today's world? Leave your opinion in the comments, like the video, and subscribe to the channel for more content like this.